Hey everyone, it's Sean here in Shenzhen. We are back live again to talk more about what life and business are like here in China. For those of you who don't know me, I've been in China for 10, 15 years. I've been living here and working for many of the Chinese tech companies like Huawei. And today I want to talk a little bit more about a LinkedIn post and a topic that I previously addressed. And that was in response to someone on LinkedIn talking about what actually is China speed, what actually is the 996 overtime, and how does each of these actually kind of help with China's advantages that it currently has in terms of manufacturing, in terms of competition with Western countries. So if you have any comments, whether you're coming from LinkedIn, from YouTube, from X, feel free to send a message in the chat. I'd be happy to take your questions. Again, I'm going to be talking about China speed and 996 based on my own experience working within Chinese companies for the last 15 years. But if you have any more general questions on China, feel free to let me know as well. So to start with, let me take a look at this LinkedIn post that I was looking at previously because I think it's useful. So let's see, where is it? So basically, what happened with this post was another guy who's in China. He said that he was talking about how 996, which is you work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, which has been fairly common, especially in the tech sector in China. He said, "Oh, there's lots of Silicon Valley companies starting to do this as well too." The problem is that while this is certainly something that happens in Chinese companies, it's not a fun thing. It's not something I enjoy if I have ever had to do something like that. When I was in tech companies in China before, there were some companies where you had to work on Saturday twice a month, which was kind of stupid. It was a management initiative to boost productivity. I don't think it really worked. But there's also companies that before the Chinese government, the local Shenzhen government made it illegal, they would have their employees work 6 days a week, every single week. But the issue is that while this does happen, and while it's possible that in some companies it does help, especially if they're trying to launch multiple products very quickly, I just don't think that it's going to be very effective. The reason is that 996, while in some rare cases might be part of China speed, I do not think it actually is the main component. And so we're going to get into that. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But moving on, as I mentioned in my own post, or my own reply, is that yes, it is true that Chinese will be working faster, that companies like Shane were able to benefit massively from being able to take new styles, take new designs, move quicker, and to produce quicker and get them over to overseas consumers. And despite the concerns about, say, overworking or forced working in the fashion industry, which is not just for China but for many countries, we saw that many overseas consumers love this. And Shane previously, I'm not sure how they'll do in the future, but previously they had a massive amount of success. But it's not just because they were working quickly or having their factory workers work quickly and work long hours. It really comes down to many different factors and many different elements about China's economy, China's manufacturing economy. So, and as I mentioned, as we see with a lot of different industries, and say it happens a lot with tech down here in Shenzhen, where I'm based in South China, we have things like supply chain co-location, where all these different suppliers that are in the same industry chain are located very close together, maybe 100 kilometers, which makes things move a lot faster. And then, of course, you have multiple factories all producing the same thing or similar things, again, produced very close together. So if you want to produce a new product, a new design, you can do it quickly and at scale, much faster than, say, many other countries could do, Western countries or Asian countries, wherever your supply chain happens to be. Of course, you have a massive skilled labor pool. This is a very big issue when it comes to talk that we've heard in the USA about uh, doing away with offshoring of labor and moving manufacturing of things like iPhones back to the USA. And on one hand, you could certainly say it's silly because um, simply because, would Americans actually be willing to manufacture the iPhone? But it's also silly because anyone who says that doesn't understand that one of the reasons that China speed, real China speed, not 996, is effective is because over the last few decades at least, China has built up a massive pool of skilled labor in a number of sectors, whether it be high-tech manufacturing or whether it be regular basic manufacturing, which means that they have all of these resources, all of this skilled labor that they can direct to new projects, to new companies very quickly. The USA, if we're just talking about the idea of iPhones, for example, or other types of smartphones, whoever makes them, we don't have that type of skilled labor. And one, it's because we simply don't have that many people in manufacturing, certainly none that would be able to move over to an iPhone plant, but we also don't have the technical skills. And that might be something you're not used to hearing when we talk about a Western country versus China, for example. But that is the reality that we see here on the ground, is that not only does China have so many more skilled talent for manufacturing, but in terms of high-tech skill, in terms of high-tech industries, we just don't have that at that scale in the West. And that's one reason why, whether or not you agree with us having to produce so many of our goods in China, it's simply how it works. Many supply chains, they just lead back to China. And I'm not even in the supply industry, but having worked in the tech industry, still working in the tech industry in China, that's simply how it is. So again, if you have any questions on China speed, 996, I'm going to get into a little bit about what it's actually like working overtime in 996 in a Chinese company based on my own experiences. But if you have any other questions about life or work in China, so we have people from LinkedIn, from YouTube, from Twitter, feel free to send a message and let me know. I'm always happy to get questions on living and working in China. But in addition to some of the things I've already mentioned, like skilled labor, the local governments in China are, whatever you think about authoritarian versus democratic government systems, they are able and willing to move a lot faster, to get rid of red tape, to speed things through. And then, of course, here's an interesting point, too, because we often talk about Chinese companies being copycats. And that's not entirely true. There are certainly plenty of smaller factories that are willing to take Western designs and kind of copy them or make their own version. I mean, there's 1.4 billion people in China. So, of course, there's going to be the good and the bad. The point is that one of the key skills that Chinese companies have, and this is actually something I talked with someone, a networking contact from LinkedIn yesterday, and we had a nice coffee, and we talked a lot about not just manufacturing and supply chain in China, but we also talked about the idea of innovation in China, because Chinese are very good at a specific type of innovation. You could call it iterative. Innovation is about maybe taking an existing idea or design and then building on top of it. So it's not copying. It's maybe making it better, improving the features, making it for a lower price, making it for better quality. All of these things come into what Chinese innovation is, because and one reason why they are having so many companies starting to make better products or the same quality at a lower price, even if they don't necessarily yet have the brand down in terms of how do they win the hearts and minds. They're making better products and they're innovating faster. That being said, we also talked yesterday about what it means to truly be innovating, not simply taking an existing idea and making it better, but how do you go from 0 to 1? So that's something that they're still working on, but because they have this iterative innovation, iterative execution, they are able to move very quickly. They aren't focused on being 100% perfect. So that's something to be aware of too. And then, of course, there's a very flat decision making. They aren't constantly getting into committee to debating back and forth. When they set a direction, they move forward. So that's very important to be aware of as well. So that's kind of just an overview of what I feel is some of the key aspects of what China's speed is. And I think it's also what relates to why many countries overseas, whether you're saying a Western country or a non-Western country, it's just very hard to gain an advantage against China's speed because China has spent decades building up this infrastructure, these capabilities, not simply from companies, but from government, from industry. It all fits together. And again, whether or not you agree with China's government model, it is very true that, say I'm from the USA, and it seems like a lot of times we flip back and forth every 4 years. Every time there's a new election, there's a new direction. And so one of the things that can be said about China, again, whether or not you agree with their model, is that they can hold the same direction for not just years, but decades. And that's a very tough nut to crack if you're trying to say, well, we don't want to produce in China anymore. Let's build up our own manufacturing sector. It's not that simple, unfortunately. So if you have any questions on Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. But we're going to be talking a little bit more now that we've covered what China speed is like. And if you're interested in learning more about the specifics of China speed, you can send me a message on LinkedIn. And I do have that post I can share. But when it comes to, say, working in high speed inside a Chinese company, and we could say 996, but it's not that simple, because when we say 996, at least for me, I think of 996 as kind of this useless overtime. And it's very possible that and no one wants to hear overtime is useful, but when I worked at Huawei, Huawei is seen as this monolith, but when it comes down to Huawei or many companies, is that you actually have not simply just one type or one style. Even though Huawei's founder Ren Zhengfei had a certain philosophy that he would pass down, that he would try and make sure all the departments, all the managers of the company would follow, it doesn't necessarily work that way. It's not that simple, because different people have their different styles, and different people might have their different interpretations, and that'll happen in many countries, many companies, many leaders. The point is that I've worked in departments, thankfully in Huawei, that were not very 996, as in we worked hard, but you didn't have a boss that said, oh, well, only the good employees stay till to 9 p.m. or later. And this happened. I've seen this happen in smaller Chinese companies. I've seen this happen, in Huawei, not for my department, but I've heard friends say, oh yeah, did you know this director? He always comes down from his office to the floor where all his workers are on at, say, 8 p.m., 9 p.m. every night. And he simply, to see who's working, to see who should be given a bonus, or who is a good worker in his opinion. So it's a lot of this silly stuff happens because it's not about being efficient. It's not about doing a good job. And this is something that, I'm sure it happens in Western countries, overseas countries too, but it certainly happens a fair share in China. And that's why, from my perspective, again, someone who's worked till 9 p.m., 10 p.m. every night for a week or two, because we have an upcoming product launch, because there actually was work to do. It actually did need to get done. The company was on a very tight deadline. And so me deciding to work in a tech company in China like Huawei or another company, I personally, again, I don't say you need to agree, though I'd love to hear what your views are on overtime in China. So if you want to leave a question in the chat, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'll be doing this every week at this time for future questions. But the point is that I signed up to work in a tech company knowing that, one, I wanted to get the experience. Two, there is very good benefits, and it's not simply a good salary, but you have a very good bonus. Say, much better than you would get even in a Western country. And you knew that if you worked harder, you could get that extra money, get that extra experience. And so it kind of was par for the course. Whereas, and this is going to be very different from maybe a non-tech company or a company without very good benefits that still might have a boss that says, oh, I expect all my employees to stay late and do work until 9 p.m. or later, or where they expect their employees to come and work on the weekends, and their employees are getting paid very low wages. There's no specific skill requirements. There's no specific extra work that they need to do. And that's why I feel personally that 996 is rather worthless, because anyone who says 996, it means it's just basic overtime. It's basic, just someone thinking, some leader thinking that if you work harder, then you're just going to somehow create more value for the company. But it generally doesn't work that way. I'll say that in some cases, say at Huawei, or if you have a big project coming up, working extra can certainly have a purpose, but simply having a very blanket 996 policy, it just doesn't work. And if you are talking about 996 in the general sense, it then gives people who don't understand management the idea that, oh, we can actually create value simply by working more. No, because, one of the things that I often see or have heard about working inside Chinese companies and Chinese tech companies is that what often happens a lot of time with 996 is that the employees will simply stay there. I mean, because the boss isn't going to stay till 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. He's going to say he expects his employees to stay. And then he goes home to do whatever he wants with his family. And then, of course, the employees, of course, they know maybe there's a video camera watching them or whatever, but they're at their desks. They have nothing to do. There's not even any work to do a lot of the time. And so they play games on their phone, or they maybe chat with their colleagues. And so this is what you hear happening a lot of time, just that people are expected to stay at the office and they just stay there because that's what they're expected to do, and they have no interest. They're not being paid to create any extra value, and so that's why it can be a mistake to try and think of 996 as China speed or even related in any way to China speed. Now, when it comes to people who are, say very driven, maybe they're in a high-powered executive role, maybe they're in a tech company that's wanting to grow very fast. Now, if the team is willing, if they're passionate, if they're willing to work longer, maybe they believe in the company's mission, or maybe they're being paid well, they're going to work harder. They're probably going to stay until 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. if needed at night, but not because of 996. It has nothing to do with 996. It simply has to do with they actually have an incentive to stay. They're being paid more, they're passionate, or maybe there's a crisis that happens and the crisis needs to be resolved. So that's what can drive efficiency inside companies, not 996. So that's my experience. It's funny because Huawei, which was very fundo meaning very determined, very hardworking in Chinese. Huawei, even though it was very fundo, they actually had one of the advertisements in China for one of their smartphones. And this might have been when I was working in the Huawei smartphone division. I can't quite remember. But it was a Chinese language advertisement for the Chinese market. And so what happened was that, is that they actually had some advertisement talking about how, I think it was the Nova camera, I'm not sure, it's been a number of years, but they were talking about how strong the screen was, how it wouldn't be scratched or anything. And so they actually had this scene where the employees were working late at night. There's nothing to do, and so they literally were just making Chinese barbecue on kebab skewers, and they literally were using the phone screen as a cutting board. And so they were kind of tongue in cheek talking about this fake 996 overtime, and also touting the strength of the screen of their new device. So I thought that was kind of funny, and I still remember it from back in the day. And so, again, if you have any questions on working in China, you can follow me on X, YouTube, Sean _China, or you can look at me via my name here, Sean Upton-McLaughlin on LinkedIn. I talk a lot about working in China, working with Chinese companies, helping Chinese companies go global, helping Western companies come to China. And so today I just want to talk about the whole 996 versus China speed, which is what I've been talking about for the last little bit. If you have any questions about working in China, China speed, 996 overtime, feel free to drop a comment down. I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the news items that we see with regards to China. And so one of the things that we saw recently was that there's continuing being talks between the USA and the Chinese side in terms of the Trump tariffs. I believe Trump just put new tariffs down. And let me just take a look quick. Yeah, it's one of those things where nothing has been decided no matter what they say in the talks. And this is actually a big danger for the USA because, as I mentioned before when we were talking about China speed, it was Chinese companies can move and they can shift very quickly. And so dragging things out is going to harm the USA, in my opinion, more than China, because, months and months ago when I was talking to some Chinese businesses, they were already saying, okay, well, the US market is kaput now. It's not reliable. We're moving our operations over to Europe, or we're still going to sell more in Europe. And so that's something to be aware of. The US might think it can kind of draw China out, that it can wait. But I just don't see how that's going to happen. And so because they can shift different directions, I've seen some companies, I hear a story about some solar companies cutting jobs, and there's probably going to be some company that maybe can shift and have them grow in a different area. So that's definitely an interesting point. Let me see if there's any other interesting news items to talk about. One of the things that I saw about China in the news was that they actually had a robot store where you could rent robots. Let me see if I can find that. Oh yeah, here. China now has a customizable robot store. And actually, I haven't had a chance to check this out yet, but apparently it's over in Shenzhen here. So let's see, the Chinese shoppers in Shenzhen can rent a customized robot alongside their groceries. So let's take a look at that. That's kind of interesting. Yeah, so apparently you can have a customizable robot in Shenzhen. I thought that was kind of interesting. Hold on, let me actually see if I can get this a different way. Anyways, so let me know if you have any questions about news items with China in Shenzhen. We're just going to have a quick chat today. I just want to do a short 30-40-minute AMA on China. And so if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I will be back here every week for a short casual chat about what's happening in China. Yeah. Yeah, apparently it's a store where there's have lots of different robots that can be customized, that can be rented. And they don't have any pictures that I can see, but this looks really interesting. Oh yeah, Unitree. I've heard of Unitree. They're a robotics company in China. Engine AI, Leiju. I don't think I've heard of them before. But rental prices, wow, it's 5,000. That's like $700 to rent a robot. So I'm gonna have to check that out. But this just shows the kind of the innovation style of China, is that they are willing to try new things. There's always some company that wants to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, see if it sticks, see if people are willing to use it in their daily lives. And that's also one reason why I like being in China, because things move a lot faster. And yes, sometimes companies go in the wrong direction, or maybe it's not received as well by the consumers, but it's very exciting. And that's one reason why, when I was working at Huawei previously, even though companies that did smartphones like Huawei, that Apple and Samsung that always got most of the attention, it was still Chinese companies, Huawei, other ones that were coming out with these new features or new functions, or at least trying them out, even if they weren't 100% perfect, long before Apple or Samsung did. I remember very clearly when, what was it? Yeah, it was the night photography, when one of my now wife had a Apple phone and I had a Huawei phone, and we were taking pictures at night somewhere in China, and I took a night picture on my Huawei phone, which was, you know, just very bright, very well done. The software was great, and she just looked at it and she said, how can you get such a wonderful night picture and I can get this crap photo on the iPhone? And that was because, Huawei was at least a year or two, at least as I remember it, a year or two ahead of Apple in terms of night photography. Now, Apple has indeed caught up as far as I remember, but it just goes to show that um, China and Chinese companies are much less cautious about bringing out new functions and features and seeing if it will work. Now, whether or not that's the best for you as a consumer, the best for your country's consumers, that's something that can be up for debate. So no problem there. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. So again, for those of you that are still with us, we're just having a quick chat today about China speed, what it actually is versus 996. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I see we have a lot of viewers from Twitter X right now. If you have any questions, you can always send me a DM, Sean _China. I'm always happy to chat about what China is actually like, what stereotypes about China are true versus which of them are not true. And as I can say, most of the ones I hear are not true, with just a lot of misinformation or just misunderstanding in overseas countries. But one of the things I always say is, it doesn't matter whether you understand China or it doesn't matter if you like China, support China, or if you don't like China and don't support China. China is continuing to grow. The companies are continuing to gain more dominance, more skill. And if you don't understand China, you're going to have a very hard spot when it comes to growing and developing in the future world, because China's coming. Everybody keeps publishing papers or books about how China, like this is the year China is going to collapse, and that's been happening for the last 20 years. There's always been new books out every single year, but they're not going anywhere. So I think we'll probably end in a few minutes. I just wanted to have a quick chat today about what China speed was like. If you're interested in more professional topics, deeper dives, that should be every Wednesday night, China time, and then Wednesday afternoon Europe time, and Wednesday morning the US time. So if you're interested in more deep dives, I do those on LinkedIn at that time, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And then, of course, every Saturday or Friday night USA time, we're going to be doing some quick casual AMAs. So if you have any questions, if you're interested in just listening, hearing about what's happening in China, then feel free to tune in. So I think with that, I mainly just got what I wanted to talk about out of the way, just really letting you know what it's actually like to work at a Chinese company, as well as what China speed actually is about and why it really cannot be replicated that easily. So I'm going to take a short pause here. If you have any questions, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be on another platform, feel free to just let me know. Enter it in the chat. I should be able to see that. And if not, I will look forward to chatting with all of you next time. All right. In that case, thanks to everybody who join today's live stream. I didn't really schedule it much in advance, but I will put a few more down scheduled for next time. So again, since I do see we have a lot of people from Twitter X, if you have any questions on China, feel free to send me a DM, but also feel free to @ me with any questions you have about working in China, living in China, and what it means to have China be such a dominant player in our globalized world. So again, thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.